Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Janome Skyline S7. In this video, I'm going to talk about the accessories that come with your machine. So to start off with, you have your instruction manual, and it's very comprehensive. It gives you a lot of good information. So I'm going to put this right over here. Then we have a couple of DVDs that come with your machine. One's the instructional DVD, and this is very simple and basic. I go into a lot more detail on my videos here, but it's worth taking a look at. Then we have the Stitch Composer. The Stitch Composer is, if you want to create more stitches than are even here included in your machine, you can create stitches using your PC and this disc, and then transfer those onto a USB stick, put that into your USB port, and stitch those out on your machine. Then we have the knee lifter. Now this lever fits right in here, and what it does is it makes it so that you can raise and lower your foot using your knee. This makes it so you can keep your hands right here where you're sewing. And this can be adjusted using this little screw right here. You can adjust how far out it swings. Okay, then we have the hardcover. The hardcover is actually a semi-hardcover, semi-soft. It's canvas, but it has the front and back are hard. And this is nice because it protects the machine. It stays upright on your machine when it's on, but once you're not using it, it folds up nice and flat so you can store that in the closet. And then, of course, we have the foot control. Now, the foot control, back here, you open this little door, take out your cord, and you can unwind this to however long is convenient for you, so that if you have a fairly short distance between where your foot control is going to be and where it's going to plug in on the machine, then you can keep this wound up to so you don't have extra cord there. It's a nice little feature. And then you put the cord like that, put your little cover back on, and there you're good to go. Now these here are for a bracket that you would put on here if you wanted to have that auxiliary accessory that's a thread cutter switch. I have one on my machine at home. Right over here is a little box, and when you press on that, and it has a cord that plugs in right over here. When you press on that, it cuts your thread for you, so that's also another hands-free feature. Really nice feature. But that is an extra accessory that you would need to purchase separately. Okay, so I'm going to plug this in right over here. Okay, that's the foot control. And then, now to get into the feet, to start with, we have the M foot. The M foot is this one right here. So you have these little wires here. The purpose of those wires is to make some slack in the top thread. So I'm going to show you using the stylus, and the stylus is one of your accessories. You want to use the stylus on your touch screen because it's more accurate and it's better for the touch screen. So let's go to this one here. Now see, it calls for that foot right there, the M foot. This is going to keep the stitches nice and flat, so there's not going to be any extra puckering. So I'm going to show you an example of that. Okay, so here's without. I just did this with the regular foot that's on the machine, and here is with. See how much flatter that is? It's nice and flat. That's the purpose of the M foot. Then we have the F foot. Now the F foot is for doing decorative stitches, especially your satin stitches. So let's get into satin stitches. When you have satin stitches, that puts a lot of thread into the fabric, like this. And it almost gives a 3D effect. Well, you need to have that little groove on the bottom of the foot that allows the stitches to flow right along really nicely. That's the F foot. It's also good for lettering because lettering also puts a lot of thread into your fabric. Okay, and then we have the blind hem foot. This is the G foot, the blind hem foot. And blind hem is where you want to do a hem on your pants or your garment that you really can't see those stitches on this side. The stitches are formed from the back right here. So that's your blind hem foot. And then this is your zipper foot. The zipper foot is pretty obvious. It's made to sew on zippers. I don't have an example of that right now, but you know what a zipper is. So you can sew really close to the edge, either on the left or on the right. Now this hole in the middle is not to sew for sewing. It's to guard your needle in case you haven't moved your needle to one side or the other, and you take a stitch. So that guards your needle to keep it from getting broken on the foot. This is also a good one to use if you're sewing piping on your garment. You can sew right next to that piping. Okay, this is the buttonhole foot. Now you have lots of options for buttonholes right in here. And buttonholes, this is an example of buttonholes that you can do. You have your keyhole buttonhole, your decorative. Most of the time I like this nice square end buttonhole. That's pretty standard. So the buttonhole foot looks really complicated, but that's because it does a lot of work for you and you don't really need to do a lot of measuring as long as you put your button right there. Let me show you how that works. And just briefly here. Hang on down here, put your button right here. Snap that in like that. And now the buttonhole foot's going to make the correct size of buttonhole. You can actually make it a little bit shorter or a little bit longer with this adjustment there. Always make a buttonhole first on a piece of scrap fabric to get the idea of how big your buttonhole should be and what kind of adjustments you need to make. Now this stabilizer bar here fits in right like that. And what that's for is if you have a thick, like multi-layer, like you're sewing a buttonhole on a coat or a jacket that has lining and batting in it, then put your coat right between those. And now instead of the feed dogs pulling on the coat, they're actually going to be pulling on the stabilizer bar. It's going to keep all those layers nice together. Most of the time I'm sewing buttonholes on garments, lightweight garments, so I don't really need the stabilizer bar all the time. Okay, and then over here we have the rolled hem. Let me go back to, okay, the rolled hem foot. Now the rolled hem foot, I'll show you what that looks like. Rolled hem, it's like this. Here you can make a fine rolled hem and not have to pre-iron those folds. The edge of the fabric goes right into this little curl and it stitches it and turns it all in one step. Really, really nice feature. You can also get a rolled hem foot that's a little bit bigger. You can see the difference between these two. This makes it a little bit wider. It's a little bit easier on your thicker fabrics. Some of your quilting cottons are a little bit kind of beefy. It makes it a little bit easier to make a rolled hem using this foot here. But this kind also goes, you can fit with your machine. It would be something you have to purchase separately. When you get other feet with your machine, make sure it says 9mm up here at the top. If it's not 9mm, it's not going to fit the ankle. So make sure it says 9mm up at the top. Then we have a foot. This is the F2, the open toe foot. Similar to the F foot in that it has this channel at the bottom, but it has open toe. Now this is nice for if you were, say you're doing your quilting and you want to stitch right in the ditch there and you want to see where your needle's landing. Having the open toe is nice for that. Okay, then this is a really fun one. This is your free motion quilting foot, and the way you put it on, you need to take the ankle completely off and fit this bar right over the needle clamp bar. Every time the needle goes up, the foot goes up. So you can make, and you lower your feed dogs using the switch over there. So this is an example of free motion quilting. I did all this just moving my fabric along as I used the free motion foot. Now, I can't remember whether I used that one or one of these here. So there's 3 feet, and these actually float along your foot. So you would use the regular ankle and just put these on there. This one is the closed toe foot. This is the open toe floating foot. And this is the one for zigzag, which you can also use for straight stitch. But for zigzag in free motion, you can do something like this, kind of like thread painting, using this kind of foot. All right. Then we have the button sewing foot. Now, when you sew on a button, you want to use this kind of button that has the holes in it, okay, for button sewing. There is actual page ahead here. This stitch right here shows you that foot, and there are adjustments that you can make so that you get the drop of the needle right, the right width for that buttonhole, for the button. Okay, so like that, and all right. Then this is your quilting foot, a 1/4 inch quilting foot. So I showed you my example of quilt piecing. To make nice 1/4 inch seams, you want to use this foot. When you're sewing that, you run the edge of your foot right along that guide there, and the needle will be in the right place to make an even 1/4 inch seam all the way down. And I'll show you, there is a stitch right up here in the quilting. Let's go with that quilt. That's it right there, and that's that foot right there. Another way you can get into the quilting stitch and see it, it sets everything, the needle position, stitch length, all where it needs to be. Another way to get into this stitch is go with the stitching, the applications, go to patchwork, and then there you go, it's the first one. You can also do a lock-o-matic stitch, but I just use the straight. Notice it's the same settings, the same foot. 2 different ways to get into that stitch. Okay. Let's get out of that. There we go. Back into this. All right. So the next thing I want to show you is this little guy here. Now this is for making a shank between your button and your fabric. It's especially good if you have pretty thick fabric that you're sewing, like a coat or something. You want to have a little bit of distance between the button and the fabric so that it's easier to button your fabric, your buttonhole. Over here, it's a little bit thicker. Here's a little bit thinner. This is also a good tool if you're sewing across some seams. Let's say you're hemming some jeans and you stitch across that seam and your presser foot starts going like this and it kind of gets bogged down and stuck. You can put this behind the presser foot, lower your presser foot, and it'll stitch nicely right across that seam. Now, the foot that comes with your machine also has a similar feature back here. You just press this in. As long as there's pressure on the front of the foot, it will sew across. The advantage of this is when you put this down here, you're actually pressing your fabric against the feed dogs and back. So both of those have, I routinely use both of those. Now here is one of the things that really makes this machine special. This is your dual feed. It's integrated into the machine. It has a motor that makes the top feed dogs actually pull the fabric along. And when you push your reverse button and you're using this, it actually pushes it back the other way. You can adjust the amount of pull that each of these stitches take by this little knob over here. So stitch out a sample. If it looks like the top is puckering up too much, then you might need to lower this value a little bit and try it again. If it looks like the bottom is still pulling too much, then you need to make this a higher value so that it pulls a little bit more. Okay, this little guy here fits right in here. Now, what I like about this, let's say I'm doing quilting. I want to get into quilt stitches, and I want to do a serpentine stitch. Instead of doing, say, free motion, I want to do serpentine. Well, this is nice because it's going to keep all my quilt layers together. instead of letting it go like this, because that's what it tends to do if you're just using your regular foot. The foot kind of tends to drag, but not with the dual feed foot. Really nice. So the reason why I'd have this is if I wanted multiple lines of my serpentine stitch, I'd sew the first one, move it over, sew right along that to make my second one, and it's an even distance without having to mark. It's really nice. This can also be used over here in the regular foot to make even lines of stitching, and it's a pretty tight fit because you don't want it to move when you're sewing, so it's supposed to be a tight fit. Fits right in the back of the ankle right there. Okay, so let's get into some of the other accessories. This is your screwdriver. It's nice and short. It's good for taking out the needle and maybe other things that you might need to do. This is your good old seam ripper. Now the seam ripper is sharp, so you want to make sure put the lid on it when you're not using it. But when you are using it, put the lid on the back. It gives you something more to hang on to. Plus, it's not going to roll away. This would be good for taking out stitches and also for opening your buttonholes. And if you can't find your stylus, you can also use it for that. If you do use something other than your stylus, make sure that it's not sharp, like a pencil or something metal. Use something plastic and soft like that. Okay, so you also get a wonderful little pair of scissors. They're nice and sharp. One of the things I noticed about these scissors that I really like is these tips are just slightly blunted, which is really nice if you're reaching into your sewing box. That's another safety feature, slightly blunted, but it's still nice and sharp and it gets right up to your stitches. Okay, over here we have a straight stitch needle plate. Now your regular needle plate, your zigzag needle plate, has a nice wide 9mm width here, so you can make 9mm lettering or decorative stitches. But if you're sewing a fine fabric, say just doing a straight stitch on a fine fabric, your fine fabrics and knits can sometimes get pushed down into that needle plate. So putting this needle plate is going to help. I sewed a wedding dress for my daughter, and I used this needle plate, and it worked wonderfully for all those fine fabrics and laces. And you can have your needle position be on either center, right with a little bit of variation, or left with a little bit of variation. By the way, your machine will read which needle plate is on, so you won't be able to accidentally do a zigzag or anything like that. And this is the little part that reads your machine reads right there. Okay, I'm going to put that over here, and then we're going to talk about some of the other things. So you have some bobbins. Now these are blue, but you can also have the clear bobbins. Just make sure if you get more than the bobbins that you have here, if you get more bobbins, make sure that they're the same size, the same height, the same flatness. These are class 15 bobbins, and if you can't remember that, just when you come here, tell them what kind of machine you have. They'll make sure you get the correct bobbins. So class 15 bobbins is a fairly common bobbin size. And then we have our cleaning brush, and I have another video on how to maintain your machine and what the cleaning brush is good for brushing out your lint. You want to clean your machine on a regular basis to make sure that you've got it nice and clean. It'll make good stitches. You don't really see the lint building up, but occasionally do that. So cleaning brush. Then we have spool caps. Now this is going to be for your larger diameter spools. You also have your smaller spool caps. I've got one already on the machine here for my smaller diameter spool. And we have the little ones for spools that don't have an end cap to them. So you'd put this on here. The idea of the spool cap is to keep your spool from sliding off the spool pin. Now, why do you have two of all these? Well, it does help if you lose one, you've got another one. But the reason why you have two of each of those is because you can do twin needle sewing. Twin needle sewing looks like this. And when you select twin needle, it's going to make sure that your twin needle's not going to make too wide of a stitch. It's a really nice feature. But you would need 2 spools of thread. You can have 2 contrasting or 2 of the exact same kind. Thread it the same way till it gets down to here, and then you thread each of the needles separately. So that's what this is for. Then we have the needle set. Now in the needle set, here is your twin needle. Okay. Now needles do wear out after a while. If you did a lot of sewing with twin needle, you would probably eventually need to get a new one. So make sure you get the same kind, same width, no wider. And notice that it has just this single shank right in the middle. Make sure you don't get ones that has a shank just on one side. It should be right in the middle. And by the way, needles, good quality needles are important. Now this needle set that comes with your machine has these different colored needles. Page 16 in your manual talks more about what those different colors mean and what kind of fabrics they're good for. When you get new needles, get good quality needles. Like, these are good quality needles, but you won't necessarily be able to find these as, a thing that you can buy off the rack. They come with your machine. So good quality needles would be like Class A or Schmetz. Here's Class A brand, here's Schmetz brand. And both of these are good quality needles. Same with your thread. Use good quality thread. And if you got both of those good, that will eliminate problems down the road. Okay, so I think that's all of your accessories. If this video has been helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can leave those in the area down below. We have lots of other videos, including other videos on this machine. So stay tuned to our YouTube channel, and thanks for watching. Bye.